Oh, is it, marketing is another name for hacking. I mean, instead of hacking, I mean, hacking relates to computers. Marketing relates to people, right? You're hacking people.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, go watch Social Dilemma.
Whew. All right, what's up, guys? I have been working my butt off on this live hacking event, so it's great to take a break and talk to you guys about this week's podcast episode that I'm super excited for because we brought on the show Jon Colston, aka Mayonaise. Jon is someone you'll see often at the top of the leaderboards on HackerOne because he takes a data science approach to bug bounty, and that really helps him multiply his findings. Every finding that he has, he's able to sort of narrow down what kind of vulnerabilities and problems that these companies are having and apply those to other endpoints to find more bugs. So it's a really fascinating interview. I hope you'll enjoy it. I most certainly did. In addition to that, we've also got the Word Fence Bug Bounty Program running a 6.25 times promotion again. If you haven't already signed up for this platform, you're crazy. You've signed up for HackerOne, you've signed up for BugCrowd, you've signed up for Integrity. Why haven't you signed up for WordFence yet? So head over to ctbb.show/WF, sign up for a researcher account today so you can stay in the loop and hear about these awesome promotions every time they come up. I've been working on that program a little bit, and I've got some automation in place that is producing a good number of bugs at a set pace. So for any of you that like static code analysis, there's definitely an opportunity there to get some automation in place as well. Alrighty, with that, let's go ahead and jump to the episode with Jon. Alrighty, Jon, I am looking at this massive document over here to the right now, filled with like pretty much just gold on the crossover between data science and bug bounty. Thanks so much for coming to the show, man, and thanks so much for all the effort you put into prepping for it.
Thanks, Justin, for having me. Yeah. For those that don't know who I am, my name is Jon Colston. I go by the handle of Mayonaise or Mayonaise or Mayo. I go through all three of those. And I got into the bug bounty world about 5 years ago, and I've been working at it to various levels since then.
So dude, yeah, Mayonaise, I've always thought about this. Mayonaise is like pretty odd name. Give us like the 30-second summary of why you chose that name, and it definitely made you a figure in the bug bounty space. We're like, who's this guy calling himself Mayonaise?
Yes. So it's funny. Young John was a huge fan of the Smashing Pumpkins, and the Siamese Dream album was one of those life changers, right? And there's a song on there, and everybody called it Mayonnaise, but it's spelled mayonnaise with one N. And then somewhere along the years, I researched the meaning of it, and it's actually like a phonetic play. It's my own eyes instead of mayonnaise. The drop of the N.
My own eyes.
My own eyes.
It's
and
like
so I thought that was sort of
pronunciation.
Cool. Yeah. So I said, hey, that's perfect, for a hack of my own eyes, sees this stuff. And I related to something, that I enjoy, which is music. And so that's how that came together.
That's awesome, man. There's so many different areas. So let me back up a little bit. The reason why we wanted to bring you on the pod is time and time again on the Critical Thinking podcast here, we have discussed the part of hacking relating to data and to taking notes on a specific target, right? And so many of the people that we have on are just like, yeah, I take notes in this astiff.txt file, and it's really like rough and there's no system to it. It's just kind of like I write things down on this paper and I stick it in my shoe or something like that, right? It's all over the place. And I was thinking, okay, we've got so many takes on that perspective. Let me get a different perspective. And I was thinking, who is the most organized and who is the most methodical, data-driven hacker that I know? And you came to mind. So what I'm hoping to get out of today is a little bit of a look into how you use data science to win bug bounties. And man, if you look at your HackerOne profile, you're winning it, man. It's great. And so I want to know about how you've done that. And I know also that you have a a specific propensity for digital marketing in your past experiences, and kind of how that plays into the data science, into the hacking role. And to get that holistic perspective, I think we're going to have to go back a little bit and hear about your career path and your career history, and how you kind of got into this digital marketing and data science areas that made you the hacker you are today. So give us a little brief introduction to that, if you would.
Yeah, so I went to Georgia Tech, and I graduated in 1999, which was the kind of the height of the .com boom, right? My focus was in information technology.
Yeah, good time.
And went to work for a startup, and was integrated as a consultant into a credit card company. Was responsible for building out a lot of their information systems, and integrating the technology that we built. Was a real-time decision engine to be able to approve customers for credit card real-time online. That was like new stuff.
Wow, that's a big deal.
Yeah, and went through that. Eventually started working for the credit card company. Did a new venture, I guess, underneath there that eventually got acquired because the whole lead generation vertical was exploding. So got into that, I guess, in that industry as part of an acquisition, built out several national brands. And with that, you had television, radio, but you had an incredible amount of digital media or digital advertising that would go on. And so I was responsible as all the analytics to tie everything together, make sure that every dollar spent was accountable for generating a return, and worked very closely, especially with the digital marketing team, to be able to understand, okay, what levers are being pushed. How do I now provide them with the information to help them make the decisions needed to perform better and acquire customers at a lower cost and at a higher volume. So that's kind of how I got into the whole. Now, as far as how that transitioned to bug bounty, I eventually had gone on to start doing my own a business that was in a completely different vertical, still lead gen, but it was in the mortgage space. We hit some walls at one point with compliance, trying to get through some legal matters, and I needed to figure out how to earn some income while we worked through those issues. And found a freelance opportunity in hacking. It was something that I was aware of. It was on my radar, but just was so busy doing this. And anyway, so I jumped in, and having a background in data science and analytics and whatnot, I took that approach. I took a very methodical data processing. How do I approach this type of mentality? And then stuck hard to one program. And I believe that was probably a little bit of naivety about how the bug bounty space was back then, favoring loyalty. But yeah, that's kind of how I went into the space.
Dude, that's such an interesting start, because one of the pieces of advice that I give to most people that are trying to start bug bounty is like, hey, you can't really be in a situation where you're, trying to enter the industry to make money because you're in some sort of situation where you don't have your finances squared down. And not only did maybe not speaking to the finances part, but you were transitioning out of a situation with your startup where you needed to find some additional income, and going into the space which adds additional pressures, and then coming from a non-security related field and just taking that expertise from that field and applying it to bug bounty. I'm not gonna lie, man, I would have bet against you. I would have bet against you that you wouldn't have been able to pull it off as well as you did, but you did. That's amazing.
Yes. So I mean, working with data with everything, right? As I was reading up, right, a lot of it had to do about hacking APIs. Well, okay, I'm very familiar with APIs. That was not something that. So then it was like, okay, how do you find APIs, right? And then so you go through that process, and then as you're reading and so much content was out there, it was basically saying, get access to systems and you go through. Well, quickly I realized whenever I got onto Yahoo is that, okay, one, they're in cleanup mode, right? They're one of the original advertising platforms, if not the original advertising platforms that were out there. So the technology was going to be old. doubling that up over, right, is that, okay, they're spending their time on the public facing assets, right? So you knew if you can get into the business of business, the B2B type of applications, then you were going to have opportunities that were going to be once in a lifetime, right? I mean, you were going to have.
Yeah, dude, this is such an intuitive approach, man. You're like, okay, let me just think. So if I was going to hack, I need to find APIs. And how do I find APIs? Well, I find some sketchy advertising company. And I like that you went in your vertical as well. You say, and that's another thing we talk about a lot on the pod is like, if you can hack within your vertical, within the thing that you understand, within the industry that you're familiar with, whether from a hobby perspective or from a work perspective, that's going to afford you a tremendous advantage. And that's what you did. So you went after Yahoo here. Anybody who has ever looked at the Yahoo leaderboard knows that you went after Yahoo, and you were finding APIs left and right, and you were trying to get your hands on these business B2B applications or some of this older stuff, right?
Right, exactly. And so when you find the APIs, and this goes back to the journal you're talking about, right? I would find those APIs. They're not vulnerable at that point in time, but they provide a wealth of information. So whenever I do get access or whatever, or it helps me identify, hey, there's a system out there that I'm not aware of. I don't know what the login is, but I can start researching that. So it was an effort to be able to identify the different platforms that were out there. Which was incredible, the number of them. Yahoo and AOL had gone through all these mergers and acquisitions. I mean, you had all these other bolt-on ad platforms that were out there. So it was just, it was a garden of opportunity. Yeah. And all of it was, all
he
these.
Says, I say a mess. He says a garden.
A garden of opportunity that just needed to be harvested. So
that's great, man. I love.
So I signed up for that job.
Yeah, no, clearly, and so you stuck for the beginning. You kind of stuck into your vertical there, and you were looking at Yahoo, spending a lot of time on them. I guess, and nowadays, are you still looking at Yahoo primarily, or have you kind of moved along? How has your methodology evolved from those early times to nowadays?
Yeah. So, Jon Colston Mayonnaise 2024 is completely different than 22, right? And so back in the day, I was fully committed and spent an insane amount of time focusing on Yahoo. I knew that the opportunity was limited and the boundaries were good. And so I just went so deep. And when I went going deep on applications, it wasn't necessarily going deep into the technology. It was going, finding if there were any seminars that were out there or public education, the B2B type thing. What were some of the things that were being pushed out to the industry that I could then like, okay, hey, they're releasing some new technology called immersion. Okay, and I need to figure out what that is. Where does that live? And things of that nature. So I'd use that also as a lead to be able to try to find things on the platform and go from there.
So about that, would you automate that actual part of it yourself, or was this just you kind of being plugged into the data sources for Yahoo and like what's happening with the platform and that sort of thing?
Both. So the automation was constantly going after and finding what are the new assets that were coming out, looking at the domain names and say, hey, this is a word I'm not familiar with. Is that a new product? So, do I need to search this more? And it would dovetail into a lot of manual searching and looking for, documentations that, a development team would use to integrate their system into their, into the ad system, because they've got a bunch of stuff to do to be able to determine, my budgets and where I'm going to put placement and things of that nature. So these companies are tied into multiple platforms, and so there's just integrations that go on. So there's documentation flying around on that kind of stuff as well.
Right.
But yeah, and all that kind of all those things were what I was used to be able to help guide me and identify those spots. So there was, I don't know how many platforms I was able to get to and put my hands on. But yeah, that was my
Dude,
goal.
the layer, the depth there, right? I just want to point out, the fact that you said, hey, I'm monitoring subdomains, right? Which is, something that's fairly normal in the bug bounty industry. It's something we do. And then he says, and there was a word I didn't know.
Yeah.
like this is the level of granularity that I feel like a lot of people don't realize that you need in bug bounty, because when you look at the list of 20,000 subdomains or more that you get back from running a subdomain enumeration scan on Yahoo, it can be overwhelming. But then Jon says, hey, there's actually a new subdomain that just popped up with a word that I don't know in it. Let me go and research what's happening with this company. Let me try to figure out what transitions are happening at this current time with the company and dive deep into that. So that's amazing, man. So
it can expose a new product, a new platform, a new technology. So understanding what the domain names provide you gives you a hint of what's going on behind the scenes.
So there's the new stuff that's happening, the new transitions that are happening with the company. There's the old stuff that you're getting access to, these antiquated applications. You've said in the notes here, somewhere that it was like stuff that was sort of pre-security lifecycle. Like security wasn't even a thought really at the time when some of these applications were being developed, because it was so, long ago. And so getting access to those core applications is important, but that's tricky, right? Getting access to some of these more complex, more niche platforms. So, I mean, were you mostly hacking from an unauthenticated perspective? How did you get your hands on credentials, or how did you actually hack these platforms?
So ultimately you had to get, 90% of the time you had to get credentials, right? A lot of the automation hacking would build a portfolio of documents that you would then silo into, okay, this is probably AOL1, or this is, DSP or something, right? So you had the wealth of the documentation, not only, and then you'd find. The typical way that you go about is, okay, can I find a place to brute force? Okay, that's limited. But even with the limitations, being on the business side of things, and this is a good tip to take back, right? If you're hacking a B2B system, and that at some point they're going to have demo accounts or test accounts so that they can share with other businesses, okay? So if you're able to identify in some capacity that, okay, it's demo at yahoo.com or whatever, and you're able to find some screen or some user dump, I don't know, but you see that, okay, that user is meant to be shared, and therefore that password is probably going to be very simplistic, and a standard brute force password cracker will go after it, right? So that's one way. Another way, especially on the B2B, is that if you can figure out who are the users, like which businesses have used the platform, and you're able to assemble that and monitor which of those companies go out of business, and then buy their domain, and then you can approach. So there was a fortunate, I was able to download a list, and then I memorized every user in that list and all the domains. You can't save it.
That's great.
So I memorized all of them, right? And and then I'd monitor and see, okay, is that GoDaddy has a great tool for that. Is this domain available? Oh, it is. Okay. Let me register that domain and create an email address. Okay, and then now
let me try to do some password reset.
Let me do a password reset.
Way.
So now two-factor authentication is kind of taken over that, right? And if you brute force an account, or you do some type of account takeover there, you're 9 times out of 10 you're going to get a hard stop from the company. Like, oh, okay, great,
right.
The bug-in's there. I do recommend saying, hey, once I get in, I didn't poke around much, but I like to see what I can do in the next X hours. Would that be possible? You might get a reprieve, and permission to go
Mhm.
in. But ultimately, I think that if you can figure out a way to overcome whatever barriers it is to get an account in your own credentials, then they can't
Mm.
stop you. They can't stop you. So
Yeah,
I would highly
that's
recommend going that
amazing.
route.
So you can also, so that's ways that we can sort of compromise accounts with trying to brute force some stuff or be able to do password resets on people whose domains have expired, and then getting your own account. That's a whole different beast, right? Because
Oh
like
yeah.
you have to, in those scenarios, you kind of gotta. You kind of got to be able to walk the walk and talk the talk to say like, hey, yeah, I know about this product. Yeah, I'm interested in using this product for my business, that sort of thing, and getting that all set up. Have you had experience with that?
Yeah. So I've tried many different times, failed quite a bit whenever you try to pretend to be a business. I think my favorite story to tell is obtaining access to the Taiwan assets of Yahoo, because those assets required a physical presence within the country and a phone number, and so and maybe even an additional ID. But there was a huge barrier
Wow.
unless you were in
Yeah.
Taiwan. You were very limited. So I, through several attempts, the first 3 or 4 failed, but finally figured out the winning methodology is that I posted a job on Upwork, and I was looking for an English translator. and
No
it was you
way.
had to be where I failed is that I would like try to hire them on, and then I'm telling them what I would do, and they were like, "No, I'm not going to hack." No, and they would go away. So in the job posting, I said, "Lifetime opportunity, ride shotgun with a hacker is we blah 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 and go after." And
Dude,
yeah,
what? That's
the response
amazing.
board just lit up, like it was like immediately slow down, slow down. And so I was able to find this wonderful lady named Lexi in Taiwan. She had a family member that actually had the mall and store and all that had those accounts. She was enough familiar. So we're like, all right, let's go. And we registered, and it was like,
No way.
yeah, we went through the whole process and registered, and she was my eyes and ears and got me in. And yeah, no, it was right timing for a live hacking event.
Dude,
And it was everything was great.
that's
But
amazing.
yeah.
So this, you jumped through those hoops, and
Mhm.
then you've got yourself an account, and now you've got access to the scope that nobody has access
Exactly.
to.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
and you've got creds, and you've got all these old APIs and beginning of the marketing era
Exactly.
tools that you've got them all to
Exactly.
yourself. Wow.
Yeah.
That
Because I
is
mean,
crazy, man. So,
I'll always admit,
mm,
like, I mean, my skill as a hacker is secondary, right? Compared to like when I watch when you guys talk about, oh yeah, we inserted a hyperlink with this tag and then we redirected and then we somehow got a heap dump in which we had the creds for the entire company on AWS. I mean, okay, fantastic. I'm not going to go there. That's not my skill set. But if I can get to assets that that or that are in line more in my skill set, then that's what I'm doing. So that's how I went after things.
That's great, man. And this whole concept of going deeper and deeper and deeper than people think you should go, or people think you have to go to find these various assets and get access to these systems and understand the company at a deeper level. That's one of the core things that's really important in Bugani, and you've kind of nailed it. So we've talked a good bit about that. I want to swing back around to so we're going to go 2 places here. We're going to go the data. We want to talk about data science and how you use data science to, more specifically, granularly, how you're using that in your recon flow, how you're using it to predict vulnerabilities and that sort of thing. And then I also want to talk about specific, because clearly you have a lot of industry expertise on digital marketing. I want to talk about digital marketing platforms in particular and some sort of I guess hands on the keyboard or looking at the data tips and tricks for how to do that. So let's start with data science. Obviously, for me, let me just kind of give a little brain dump of what I'm thinking here. So when I think data science plus bug bounty, I'm thinking mostly from a recon perspective. But if you look at your HackerOne profile, you're not just doing recon, you're finding a lot of vulns. So I'm wondering how much of your methodology that uses data science is pertaining to reconnaissance, and how much of it actually gives you a tangible vulnerability. And then I guess you can kind of talk about either one of those, recon and the actual vulnerability itself.
Yes. So figuring out how to best approach this and explain it. So data science, I use it as a construct. It's not a one and done type thing, applying it to word list. It's applying it to everything I do. And so to do that, I go under the mantra. Peter Drucker, he's a management philosopher. He came up with this saying: "Is what is not measured is not managed." Right. And so when you put everything into that framework, is that you want to measure everything, and because if you're able to measure it, then you're able to optimize it. So to do that in bug bounty, most of us, or whenever I watch hackers use the tools, they're a one and doneer, right? It's not built into some system that's intended to keep track of performance that you can then later go back at a future date and make modifications and do your optimization. So I built a system that, like, whenever I run a fuzz on a target, right, it's going to log everything that I do. So I have wrappers around all my tools, and I call that worker with this, and then I make sure that all that information goes into I say a database, but it's flat files that I can later use.
Okay. I'm going to pause you right there, because there's just so much to unwind just right there. Okay. So first step is we need to measure everything so that we can optimize everything, so that we can perform better as bug bounty hunters. In order to do that, what you've done is you've wrapped all of your tools with some sort of I guess some sort of script or something that is going to be taking the output of that tool and allowing you to retrieve the output later if you need to. Or can you just talk a little bit? It's going into flat files. You say a database, but it's going into flat files, and then you're searching those flat files for patterns that you've identified. Is that the idea?
So yeah, it's next level. So let's just take, we have one file that we're fuzzing, right? And it's a generic file, and you're fuzzing it on all domains, right? So let's take a look at all the ways that we can measure that, right? So we have a domain, right? We know what the program is. We know the subdomain of that program, or whatever the root is, right? Those are two pieces of traceability that you need to have, right? So you not only domain, subdomain, and program, right? Then you give it the file. How big is that file? What is the purpose of that file, and can I track it so I know the identity of it, right? So how many records in, right? How many records out? How many successful hits did it have? And your definition of successful hit could be different between people, whatever, right? So now I have a hit rate for that file by that program, by that root. Okay. So now I can start seeing, okay, this particular file is going to have a performance of X on here. So now whenever you start looking at the bigger picture of things, I have a hit rate of X% here and Y% here. Why is that? Right? Okay, this then you start getting to the topics of relevancy and all that stuff, right? So that's a very generic.
You're correlating. I can see. I'm starting to see it here. So you say, okay, I ran this across this specific set of subdomains. I'd expect I get this specific hit rate. I run it across this subdomains, and wow, this hit rate is specifically, drastically different. What is? Am I doing something wrong here? Does this file just not exist on these subdomains? But they should exist. So maybe a certain path is mapped wrong or incorrectly or differently or something like that. And Wow. Okay.
So
Interesting.
so applying it to flat files, you're not going to have that much of a difference. But
Sure.
whenever you start getting into your like specific files, that okay, so all my files have a unique purpose. Like I have a purpose. This file is meant to find APIs. This file is meant to find endpoints that reveal directory structures or additional endpoints within the server. This file is meant for find upload features. I don't, you have, right? You'll quickly be able to start finding things accordingly by program, by the actual route within the program, and be able to see what you're doing well and what you're doing not, right? And so if you can identify, okay, here are my top performers. Here's my 10 top performers. Why is it performing well? What is happening here that I can then? So where I'm going is that whenever you take a look and you just look at your standard, your output of it, how do you measure it? How do you know you're improving on your fuzzing? How do you know that your word list is applicable or relevant to this file or to this program or this program or this program? So now once you build and this is a bit of an overkill. And the only reason why I do this is because
hey, you said it, not me, man.
No, it's an overkill, and what I only hope is that for people, for the audience that's listening here, is that you can take a little tidbits away. And you don't have to build out this massive system, but being able to understand, how to put together a construct so you can start measuring performance across different programs, different word lists, different sections. So how's your crawler doing? How's your link finder doing? Why is this? Clearly I'm missing out on some keywords for this program because its hit rate is very low. What's unique about it? Let me try to spend some extra time fuzzing on it to see if there's a different path to, the files that I normally use to be able to determine like a directory structure. So it kind of identifies areas where you can focus and then whatnot.
So you're assigning performance, you're measuring even down to like the path in the directory level, and creating lists and analytics that are telling you about the efficiency of specific like directory brute forcing list entries.
Well, it's just
that granularly.
Yeah, and where it goes in is okay. So
wow.
So I have workflows, right? And so one of my main workflows goes through a series, and it looks something like this. It's like a quick hit fuzz of like things that's going to reveal directory structure on, right? And some of it's API, but a lot of it's like robots.txt, asset manifest, things of that nature, right?
Sure.
Okay, it goes in, run a crawler, run a link finder. Okay, now words are that are relevant to the host are generated. Okay, put those words into a recipe ingredient type mix. Run that through. Do I get additional hits? Okay, so I'm stepping through a series of 30 different sub processes within this workflow. And I need to be able to manage it. I need to have KPIs on each one. So all the way back to, okay, it's part of this program. It's looking from this subdomain that is, this is the actual subdomain, but this was the root domain. Okay, it goes through, all right, here are the performance of the 30 steps of this process is, the results. Okay, now I can aggregate that up. I can now say, okay, this program or this route or, what the performances of the hit rates and whatnot. That's just in like content discovery. You go back and you start doing a different analysis from a standpoint of, did I get a bug, right? And then trace it back. So as soon as I get a bug, I'm going back, tracing through all the processes, all the way back to how did I find that? What was the source? Like, was this part of a pull from security trails? Was it like a CIDR scheme?
Yeah.
What it was, right? And so,
yeah.
By putting all this together, you start understanding. Now, this is very it falls into the automationist realm. I heard that being kicked around, and right?
Yeah, for sure, 100%.
Right. And so there's tools that can these concepts can be applied to people that not necessarily are wanting to build out the full automation is you can build out, you can use this concept to build out, okay, I'm going to do a new keyword discovery tool, right? Because I need to add and grow my word list. Okay, well, let's use that.
So I want to hear about that, and I want to also go back to what you were saying before about tracing the vulnerability. Now you found the vulnerability. Let me see what parts of my process led to me finding that endpoint, which found to that vulnerability. But first, I want to get a little bit into the weeds on how exactly you're doing this, because I was like, when I hear you talk about statistical analysis on paths and stuff like that, I'm like, wow, that sounds really cool. I should have all of my word lists sorted by, hey, this is the ones that are going to hit first, statistically across, a big set of data. But I'm a little bit, like, when I start thinking about how I'm going to program that and how I'm going to do that, it gets a little bit fuzzy for me. So, sure. I mean, obviously, how are you? You mentioned flat files. You said database, and then you're like, oh, well, it's actually flat files.
Yeah.
I mean, are you computing efficiency for these specific paths, and then like storing them in a flash file or in a flat file in like CSV format, and then like dumping it in after you've sorted it with, I don't know, how are you doing this?
Yeah. It's not quite as automated as what you're going. It's just I'm collecting the data that leads me to the information, or leads me to where I can start diving. So let's say this process that has X number of sub-processes, right? I'm going to, like, I know what each sub-process does. So I know the word list that it uses, but I'm going to count in, okay, how many records in, how many hits, right? And I'm going to dump that to a KPI log, right? So for this sub-process, this is the in, this out, and this is the time duration. Because whenever
that's important too.
Yeah, where I'm going with this is that I want at the end of the day, I want to sit down, have a cup of coffee, spend 2 hours writing reports, and then go play golf. I mean, that's what I want. But that's the end goal. I'm not trying to be like I'm not trying to be the guy. I'm not trying to be like, oh, I create this great attack vector, and like I am what I am. I call this practice retirement right now. I'm figuring out what I'm going to do, but I'm living the good life. I'm taking my intensity down a bit, and if I can have these systems generate a list of what I call opportunities, I'm basically I'm building a lead generation platform for hackers. It's going to give me leads at the end of the day. There's going to be opportunities, and
that's a great way to call it right there. It's lead gen for Vulns.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow,
that's exactly what I'm trying to build.
That's clutch.
I'm not doing. It's not vulnerability scanning. While that is part of it, you can run nuclei all day long, and find stuff there. But this is stuff that is tailored just to me, right? And so let's say there's another hacker that eventually partner up with that is like, oh, I'm like, A game is SQL injection. Okay, what are your flags? Let me program it in. Here's your feed, right? And so that's kind of where I'm going with it. So,
wow, but your key performance indicators there is your inputs. You're saying, okay, I'm fuzzing this file. This file of let's say you mentioned quick hits before, right? We've got like quickhits.txt or whatever. And we fuzz that on a target, and then we say, okay, it took this much time. There's this many hits and this many, I guess this many entries in the thing. So you can say, okay, my success rate on this specific word list is X percent. And then, but you're probably not breaking it down further than that and saying, okay, well, let me take the 6% that hit. No. Okay. Because that's just, it gets a little bit crazy. Because then at that point, you'd have to actually have a database.
Yeah. Well, eventually you do from a standpoint of, okay, you know what was contained in the file, you know what your hits were, you know which, like, so you could filter down and say, okay, give me just the hits that have happened and put it in, right? It's more making sure that you're not going completely out of bounds. Okay, did that file run in 20 seconds? Okay, I'm fine. Because it's just the initial stage. I don't want it to be, be a hog. But as you go through my process, I'm bolting on and adding new stuff, and I'm building word lists on the fly dynamically based upon what's been. So, what words are in the domain? Okay, those need to be fuzzed. They need to be fuzzed in a certain pattern. And what words, XML link finder find out that are say, hey, these are relevant to the target. Okay, those need to put in some type of recipe ingredient combination that can then go into be fuzzed, right? So, you know, let's say you're going through and you see an outlier, and all of a sudden that, okay, you found this one step of your process where, you know, all of a sudden there were 5 million keywords that were like, whoa, wait, what happened here, right? Now you're able to go in and that from an optimization standpoint, say, okay, what specifically occurred here? Because that's messed up. I don't ever want that to happen. Or you can say, hey, this particular recipe in my keyword is working really well. Okay, how can I find other variants of that I can then add in? So, it's V2 Word internal. I don't know what it. Okay, well now let's go in and find V3, 4, 5, 1, and
that's so data driven. I love that, because it's like one of the things that I often do is I'll get excited about that, and I'll get all the data and I'll get it in a database, and I'll be like, all right, I got all the data, you know, and then I won't even necessarily go back and be like, okay, well, what paths really have been performing well across this whole, this whole target, and what can I extrapolate from that? It's all about extrapolation in these sort of contexts too. It's like looking at the things that you've done that have succeeded and saying, hey, why did these succeed, and how can I replicate that? And actually, I mentioned a couple times on the pod before that I was really into recon back in the day, and I implemented something similar to this, where I would even just parsing the words from the domain name, nothing else, just the domain name, and using those words to enumerate other domain names, and this whole concept that we were talking about off air of recipes and ingredients and that sort of thing. And man, I was blown away by the results, man. There's just a ton of stuff you'll miss because it's not in security trails, it's not in any of this other stuff, but it is there when you start mixing and matching all these words together. So 2 questions with that. One, how do you get your ingredients? You mentioned that you're using words related to the target. You're pulling it from various tools. Let's say you've got a domain. It's all words just smushed together. How do you tell where the word starts and begins?
Okay, well, so one is that data science is used for probability. It's not to get 100%. So if, let's say, there's a domain that is like 36 characters long and there's no dashes and dots, okay, that's a one-off. How many other domains are you ever going to see that like that again? So just stay the watch. Hey, rare. Let that one go. It's not worth my time to find that. So I break down the domains, subdomains. So actually, let's start back. We've got all of our different data repositories that we're pulling from. All that information comes in. All right. You have ones that resolve, ones that don't resolve. Just because they don't resolve doesn't mean they don't have value. Make sure you store
some that resolved in the past.
It could have. Exactly. You don't know. It can resolve in the future. So
it could resolve on the back end.
Still, yes. You can still keep trying to resolve it over the next 30 days or so, or whatever. Right. Okay. So now you got this information, right? And what you start looking for is frequency, right? Frequency of words. So you break it down. So let's do a quick example. You got, 10,000 subdomains. You break it down by the dashes and dots, and sometimes you leave dashes together, whatever. And then you do a frequency. Do a frequency of what is showing up. So you're going to see API, you can see admin, you can see internal, you can see blah, 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 right? And what you're going to realize is, So as you go through and so let's say you take the top, 100 words, all right, then you say, okay, what does this fall into? Okay, this is related to API. Okay, so this is an API ingredient. So API 1, YQL, blah, blah, blah. Those are all
and you're manually doing this.
You have to. Right. I mean, there has to be some type of
in the beginning for sure.
I mean, so you're grouping, and you'll find that there's not crazy amounts of. You might get in like the specifics of there might be a particular company that puts their co-location in the mix, right?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, and so the nuance of that and being able to go through and understand, but you put together a list of ingredients, a word list of each ingredient as you go through, and the word list is to tell you what the ingredients are based on the frequency of what's been shown up in the past. All right. So now you've got the ingredients. So now build a loop that replaces those words in your 10,000 domains with the ingredient name. All right. And then now you start, okay, re-summarize that up. And then now you're starting to see, okay, and if at the end, if you haven't fully identified all the things, just have it insert a generic word, like this word goes here, right? So that way you can then start summarizing up and then say, okay, what are my recipes? All right. So it's, API, internal, some word,
version number, word,
environment,
integer.
yes, blah blah blah, right? And you'll say, oh, here's 20 recipes that may be specific to that program, may be very generic for all programs. I mean, it depends on what you start with, right?
Wow.
And so now,
and you see this a lot with stuff across a lot of companies, and you also see stuff like AWS region and like you mentioned, prod, QA, that sort of thing all over the place. And yeah, these could be relevant specifically to the company, or these could be across all companies. It's just a human thing. So correlating those as well, that's great. So you've got your ingredients, you've broken those down by the dots and the dashes. Haven't done any word splitting, just mostly done it that way. And then you've identified and you've grouped your words. So you said, okay, API words would be API 1, API 2, that sort of thing, or like maybe it's like backend API, back API, so something like that. And then you've got those sort of groups, and then you do all of the combinations of all of them, resolve all of them, and then that tells you, I mean, obviously you'll definitely identify some of the additional hosts that you didn't have that were based off of those patterns. But I'm wondering what other takeaways as well you have from that, where you can say, okay, this specific word is particularly high frequency or high performing. How can I replicate this success elsewhere?
Yeah. So are you talking about like using that same methodology in like content discovery?
Yeah, well, absolutely. There's definitely that piece, and so you've got a list of ingredients and recipes, and you've enumerated a bunch of subdomains, and now we're going an extra layer down, and so you're using this as well for content discovery.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about content discovery, right? Okay, so let's say. All right, so you're in your fuzzing stage, right? And I mentioned like there's 30 processes in mind, and that this is a number. I don't know exactly how many they are. All right, but so it goes down. So now we're going to start looking for words that are relevant, because relevant is a very important aspect of finding content. Let's take whatever is relevant. All right, so we know that the domain words are relevant because it provides information. You're going to find 3-letter acronyms. You're going to find products. You're going to find things of that nature that are listed in there. All right. So now through your history, so now you've got years worth of fuzz history that you've now captured over time, right? And you kind of say, okay, what are some of the paths that you commonly see whenever a word is listed in domain? How does it apply to like finding APIs, right? So you take a look at it and you're like, okay, I've noticed now that it takes a word from the domain, all right, and I do domain -API -swagger.json. Right. And so you start adding in and start playing around with, okay, how do I take the information that I have, and then how do I then apply it? Extremely relevant and abbreviated, so it's quick.
Dude,
but highly.
I love this. So then there's an extra layer of this here. Okay, so now we say, okay, what do I know about domains that have this recipe, or what do I know about domains that have an API group keyword in it? And then you can cross-reference, because some other host has some weird, get all URLs or way back, entry. on a different domain, and it's not even the same API, string, but it's in the same API group. And so you take, but because you're correlating it with the API group directly, you're grabbing that string, that path, and you're trying it on this totally different other host, because you've drawn the connection between those groups. Wow, dude, this is crazy.
So now let's talk about go to the next level, and this is something I recommend for the automationists and
take it to the next level from there. Okay, all right. I'm listening, John. Let's go.
All right, so there is this need to always look for new keywords, right? And grow your list and validate. So when we start, right, we're given a keyword list that we download from SecOps, right? Or I'm going to say JHADX because I think he's amazing. I'm the all.txt, right? Whenever I first started, the most frustrating thing is that there was no context, right? Every word was of equal weight, when I know that some words are much more valuable than others. All right.
Yeah.
So let's take a sample where, okay, over time we have now, if we're doing a bunch of, so let's say you got 10,000 domains, but you get 10,000 domains. Some you're interested in, some you're not. Doesn't matter. Okay, still throw them in there, right? And take whatever word list you got, and create some loop bash processes. Basically, say, okay, I want you to take the first 1,000 of that list, and I want you to fuzz these 10,000 domains, and I want you to dump the results. And then I want you to go back and get the next 1,000, and then the next 1,000, and the next 1,000, and the next 1,000, and you're just dumping the results, right? Now you've got something that provides you with what are my hit rates for each one of those words, right? Now I took a list of 2 million, right? And now it's scrubbed out, and now I've got, these with, 1,000 hits, and I've got these with 2 hits, right? You now start to build weight. And then whenever you start taking a look at weight, and then you can say, okay, you did that first, 2 million that you got from SecOps. Maybe you go get a bunch of stuff from Asset Note as it comes in. But you're continually feeding this machine that's just, okay, dedupe, have I ever fuzzed this before? Yes or no? Okay, no, I haven't. Okay, let's toss it in. And it's just grinding in the background. Just set up a server that does nothing but this, right? And then put a reminder on your calendar so it can put in another 2 million or whatever, right? Or you're finding like some patterns, whatever, and you're like, okay, let's see what happens if I do config v2, right? And then do every iteration of that. It just sits and runs in the background on, and then you're just occasionally go in and it's like, oh, this is interesting. This is something that has a high relevancy rate. I need to start looking into this more, and then starting adding that into. So if I can, before I start adding new keywords into my production files, I want to know that they're relevant, right? I just don't want to throw fudge at the wall and see what sticks. Do that outside, or protect my core process. And then
That's great. So then we're waiting at that level too. And wow, this is just, I knew that your process here was pretty in depth. This is a lot deeper than I thought, actually. So I'm very impressed. And I'm sure there's so much more we could dive into with regards to like where you're getting all of these data sources, and how you're actually going that deep to correlate all these. But I want to do 2 things. One, I want to emphasize what you said just a moment ago, which was you went through and you categorized what words belong to what conceptual group. And I think this is something that a lot of hackers would have a little bit of a stigma against, because it's like, I'm going to go through here and I'm going to manually say, okay, this belongs to this group. This belongs to this group. This belongs to this group. And it's a manual process, especially automationists in general don't love, manual processes. But that specific thing that you did requires a human brain. And it requires you to be able to look at it and say, this is, and sort of empathize with the developer and say, that's what they were thinking when they did this, or these 2 ideas are drawn together by nature of, how words work and that sort of thing. And so using that extra little bit of human touch, I think, is an extra step that a lot of people don't go, and is really necessary in the data science world. That whole categorization piece, right? That's very cool. Is there any other scenarios like that you could explain to us, and then we'll talk about data sources and where you're getting, like security trails and that sort of thing.
As far as like manual classification,
yeah,
I mean, it's so built into my processes. I'm trying to think.
Yeah.
There's so many manual things that I do, right? I mean, you can't automate everything.
Yeah.
You want to be able to look at stuff, especially
talk to me about your manual processes. Then this will be great, because someone who does lean a lot into automation, I want to know what you do manually.
Yeah. So my manual stuff is, now that I've got a system that collects all the data, I ask questions, right? And the manual stuff is investigating, like, I know what I'm monitoring, but what else should I be monitoring? What else can I find? So if I can spot a trend with like some type of directory structure, right, that has a decent hit rate. Okay, let me come up with a way to create 100,000 variants of that. Run it through and see if I get any hits. Then make it to the production. Hell, and I might find 4 bugs while I'm doing that, just in the discovery process, right? That's manual.
Right.
The process is doing what it's doing,
great.
but the concept of
let's take that example really quick and say, okay, walk me through that. So for you, what that looks like is, I'm going to I'm logging into my server, and I'm saying, hey, what paths have the highest hit rate?
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, you can kind of go through that, but as you're going through data, you'll see stuff that sticks out. Like you'll see, if you're doing like API, all of a sudden you start seeing, with all this crawl and whatnot, you're starting to see swaggers with variables on it. Well, that's interesting. Right? How many other swaggers with variables do I have on it? Oh, right. Can I hit it without the variable? I can't. Okay. So how many swaggers am I missing? Okay. And it leads you down a path. It's like, okay, well, shit, I need to figure out what variables I do. Okay, can I go to big data query? Can I go to asset node? Can I find examples of this in any type of live, right? What are some examples? Okay, it's group 1, group 2. Okay, that's a trend. Okay, so let me do, a bunch of different tests, and that's going to go out against all those domains and see if I can pick up something that I missed. Or pick up on something that is being left out. Maybe it's like, oh man, here my variable values should be part of the the word list that gets dumped out from XML link finder. Okay, oh, what if I add that in, right? And so the manual process is getting in there, getting your hands dirty, and asking the questions, and being able to pull out the data. Right? You don't know what you don't know, and you gotta. That's where most of my manual aspect is from.
And for that, are you mostly like looking at? Are you picking a random host and being like, okay, what is this? What questions can I ask about this host? Or are you looking at the data from an overall perspective and saying, okay, this host has a 12% higher hit rate than other hosts. So I'm going to look at this one, or maybe I'm going to look at the one that doesn't have a very high hit rate because something's weird there. Or how do you decide?
Yeah. So yes. So actually what happens, so most of this hit rate stuff for the most part is going to be more operational. Make sure I stay within line. I'm not going outside. My target is 4 minutes, 5 minutes at max on a, if I can get through 3,000 targets on one server a day, fantastic. Right. That's dialed into that. Right. So what happens for me is I go through all this automation process, blah, 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 blah. We'll talk about the conversion funnel. But anyway, at the output of the conversion funnel at the very end is a log file for me that basically has said what it's discovered. The endpoints, it tells me what method was used, get, push, pull, blah, blah, blah. It tells me or get, post, get, pull, get, post, patch. But,
okay. I see. Yes.
Right. What method was used? What stage of the process it found? So if it's a 403 on a crawl, that's going to be more interesting to me than a 403 on a fuzz, because it's much more relevant. Right. So now I have a little bit of information that, okay, if I'm going to spend some time doing 403 bypass, I'm going to do it on the crawl versus, so I'm going to weight that accordingly. Right. And then I'm looking at all the endpoints, right? I'm looking at all the endpoints, and I'll see something that I had not expected to see. There's something that comes out. I was like, interesting. I've never seen this before. Or if I am diving, like, is it host that's interesting, and I'm diving in and I'm, crawling it, and I'm, messing around with burp, and I find something interesting on that. I'm like, oh, hey, I need to look at this. I have all the data historically stored. Now I can then, now that identified as a question that needs to be asked, let me go answer that question with the data that I put in.
Wow, man. The breadth of it all is a little overwhelming to me as somebody who doesn't really do data science on all this. So then, you get this question.
Does that make sense? Because I want to make sure. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? Because I want to make sure that point gets through.
No, it does. So, you're looking at a specific host. You're saying, okay, I'm weighting things like crawling versus, hitting various paths. I'm weighting probably status codes and weighting, all these different attributes of the domain, method used, get, post, put, whatever. And then, you're looking at the interesting things from there. That all makes sense. And then you find something interesting, through manually looking through it. At the end of the day, you've actually got to do the hacking, right? You've got to read, and you've got to put together the attack vector in your brain. And then, there's this, and you're looking at all this in the log file. And so, then you go back to ask the data a question about XYZ thing. And I imagine this doesn't take a normal shape, right? And this is the sort of thing that's a little bit hard for me to wrap my head around. Okay. But, you've got something like, hey, where do I see 403s or something like that? Should I pay attention to 403s on this specific endpoint? Are you just running a grep across all of your, 100 terabytes of files to try to get data on that question? Or what kind of common forms does this ask the data a question take?
Sure. So I was using a standpoint of with a Swagger that has a variable, it's a 200. And
perfect. Let's go back to
the variable, I'm not getting anything. I'm like, okay, that's something, right? That is something that I need to be aware of. All right. One, let me go back and see if I've ever seen a variable on a Swagger before. And if I have, what's the frequency of it? Okay, I haven't. Okay. What if now I then create a test fuzz that does nothing but fuzz for different variables, right, values, and see if I can get a hit on all those, right? I've learned this. I've learned that this is now a new way to extract data. How can I apply it to all the data that I have that's very relevant, right? How do I do that? So now and then I'm okay, we extract all the whatever swagger.jsons, and then, okay, I'm going to put together and craft a specific test that I can measure and say, okay, I'm going to put in 50,000 variable names and run this through. Am I getting hits? Oh, dang, it hit on 2. Okay, it might not be a vulnerability, but now in my head, I'm like, okay, I need to be aware of this, and I need to be able to then update my processes to at least take into consideration. And then if it's a new segment in, okay, now I'm starting to measure that. Okay, how much time am I spending on this? What's my hit rate for this new test that I've created that is about this one specific thing?
Wow. Okay. It's you've said all of that in different parts. Now the picture is getting much clearer. So you're saying, okay, I've got variables on the Swagger file. I'm going to scan across all these things to see where have I ever seen variables on a Swagger file before, and you're updating your process to maybe even weight that higher in the future and say, okay, if I've got something like a Swagger file, and then that's XYZ weighting rating, and then if it has variables, that's a little bit more interesting because I'm getting more deep.
But it also tells you how complete of an assessment you're doing, right? And so leave your existing program going. Don't modify it and keep it going. It's all about testing, right? You're all about trying to test and find new winners. So you put together a hypothetical test. You're saying, okay, let's see if I do this, right? And I started with 10,000 different variable names in my test. I only got a hit on 5, and it was always group 1, group 2, group 3, group 4. Okay, well, that may be an industry standard. It's just groups. So all I need to do is those 10 names and put it into the process, and now I got coverage, right? I got a process that takes 1 second to run, and it's going to find incrementally more than I did the day before.
Wow, that's pretty lit, dude. And I think reintegrating all of that too is really it's a challenge from a programming perspective. And one of the things I didn't love about being an automationist back in the day was this this concept of I'm spending so much time programming, and it results in cool bugs. But I like to spend more time staring at other people's code and wondering how to break it than writing my own crappy code that's gonna break.
Right. No, it's a headache. It's a headache and whatever. Yeah, and most of them, a lot. I would say actually this month, majority of my time has been trying to tinker around and get my server one of my servers that broke back up and running. Right, and that's a pain. But whenever it does run, right, I sit down and in 4 hours pull out 8 bugs. Okay, great. So now if I can do that every single day, but I just got to get it back. And thank goodness for AI, because oh my gosh, I mean for me to sit down and code, that's a pain. But now with AI, shoot, just I need this, and this. Thank you very much. Copy paste.
And that's amazing. And I want to hear about. So obviously you're using it from a coding perspective. And I hate to even ask this question because we normally try to stay away from like what programming language are you using, sort of questions. But I mean, what are you doing with all this? Because this is, I mean, if you're doing all this in like Bash, then it's going to be insane to maintain.
It is bad. I mean, it is all in Bash, but it's all like,
dude, you're a beast, man. I don't understand how you do this.
Well, so it's workflow type of thing, right? And in Bash, and I just basically, if then, okay, did it pass this step? If then, it's if then steps all the way through.
Yeah.
Right? And something come out, okay, then simple. You only focus on one small segment each time, right?
You've got it, compartmentalized.
Right?
That makes sense.
Very compartmental. Yeah. And if somebody would look at my code and like, you are nuts, you're not a programmer. I'm like, you're absolutely right. I'm not a programmer, but it works, and this is how I've got it done, right? I was able to do it.
Wow, dude.
It goes. So, Bash is a very simple scripting language, and that's very easy for me to understand. If I get into some type of object oriented, I'm gonna be just lost. It's just not.
Wow, dude.
My skill set.
That's legendary. And I think it probably really speaks to the organization of the system as well. Having it compartmentalized out to different pieces. So that's really cool. I want to go towards the working backwards from a vuln and learning how to do that, and then but before that, I want to talk about your data sources. So you mentioned before, you've got these various curated lists that you've got. You mentioned a crawler. You mentioned security trails. Any other data sources you want to kind of shout out and share with the people?
Yeah. Whenever you're talking about paid sources, security trails seems to be top spot. I think that I do. Maybe. I'm just going off. Whenever you start taking a look at all the different sources you can get from, Zoomai to Shodan to Binary Edge, right? I've tested them all, and I've integrated them all. Some I've cut. But yeah, so I'm doing all that. So those are the data sets. Some are free, some are not, right? So let's go back to so when we were talking about this, let's talk about, how to incorporate scope management, this whole data management or data science thing, right? I prioritize, so I have a scope management tool, which is basically flat file that has program, subdomain, or CDIR, blah, 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 whatever the target type, where the target is. Is it in scope? What's the platform? What processes I need to include or not? Okay, if Recon's one of those processes or for pulling data, I can assign it a value of 1 through whatever. And 1 is daily or multiple times a day. 2 is, I can stage it. So I'm using data science also to tell me what the frequency in which I should pull from these locations. So then I'm not wasting money on, I know, it's overkill at times.
That's crazy. It is a little
Well,
over engineered. I'm not going to lie,
though.
but it's very efficient. It is, man. It is, and querying an API all the time is going to cost a ton, especially if you're going for these paid data sources.
Yeah. So I mean, I've between data and servers, I'm pushing close to $1,500 a month. Right, that's a mortgage payment.
Wow, I was going to ask that. Yeah, $1,500 a month. I mean, and that doesn't, a lot of people would wince at that. I know friends that are in this community that are like, $10 a month for a server. I'm like, come on. But having this whole access to this whole data service is massively advantageous.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly. And the other thing with this too, from the automationist side, is like, we've been talking with people on the podcast lately about the sort of trade-off that we've seen over the past couple of years of less people focusing on recon and more people focusing on sort of diving deep and knowing the application. Not that those are mutually exclusive, but the one thing that I miss about automation stuff is like, and I think to be honest, for me, the money sort of evened out either way. But the one thing that I miss about the automation is like, I'm going to, like you mentioned, wake up in the morning, get my cup of coffee, sit down, and then it's all doing it. And if I go to the golf course, then it's still working for me. And I don't have to stress like, I'm not looking for bugs right now.
Exactly.
So I do think while there is stressors of like keeping your servers up, keeping your code maintained, there's a lot of relief that comes as well from knowing that something's constantly working, something efficient, something that you've built is constantly working in your favor. So that's definitely something to be considered for the people that are looking to have a little bit more of a relaxed lifestyle, kind of like you mentioned, of like pre-retirement sort of vibes. That could definitely be a great solution.
So, yeah, if I put a little commentary to that, is that I will say this: like whenever I was going crazy deep dive and doing the things that I was doing, that was so much. That was rewarded so much more, right? I lost years of my life doing it. And there was a price to pay for that.
I'm sure you did.
But hands down, that was much more profitable. And I've decided to go this way because I needed to reinvent my relationship with bug bounty. I needed to chill out. I needed to get to another stage of life. So I've gone this automation-ish route. It identifies properties. It's not going to find bugs per se. It's going to find the opportunities to find bugs. And to the point of that, and you may have a little bit of this, Justin, is that I love to create, right? I love creating things, and hacking is destroying. Automation is creating. So a lot of it's kind of, hey, I want to build something, and I have
hacking is destroying. Yeah.
It is destroying because there's a thing, right? You find a bug, you submit it. What residual value does it have? It's done. It's gone. It's gone. There's nothing else that like there's no more return. It's not like an annuity, and then like every year you're gonna get paid an additional incremental value of it. No, it's done. So investing into something that helps you out, and I don't know, maybe it's just to make me feel good. I don't know, but I enjoy tinkering, and obviously I'm nuts about this data stuff. So.
Yeah, that's very clear. Not gonna lie, John. That's awesome. Great. So we covered the data sources a little bit. Clearly you're not shying away from paying for data sources. You're clearly trying to get a lot of coverage. Pulling from lots of different places, and then sort of determining what is the best frequency to do with that. And then so bringing it back around to the how do we identify the source for our vulnerability? Can you tell me a bit about that system? So you've let's say you've just found a vulnerability. How are you working back and letting that inform what automation stuff you'll do in the future?
Yeah. Okay. So I get a vulnerability. I submit it. All right. First thing, is it a duplicate or is it new?
It's a new one. I like this though. This is good.
Right? Because it's a duplicate. I'm like, shit. Why was I not the first? Right?
Right.
So it's a new one. Okay, I go through, right? So I trace through. I see, okay, how my content discovery worked. What did it find? Compared to what did I do to actually discover the bug, right? So it may have alerted me that, hey, you need to look at this. And then I dive into it and I'm like, oh, I'm putting this piece with this piece, and then fully formulating what the bug is. I then ask, okay, is that something that can be added, or was this just something that I just need to make sure that I test whenever this is something that was a one-off. So that's feedback there. Then I go back and I say, okay, when did it enter my content, and how long did it take from discovery and resolution to it to get to content? So I'm taking a look at the time differential. Like, was my queue too long? Was my queue, it took 5 hours, or do I need to spin up another server to clear out that queue up? Right. So I'm looking at the time. Then I'm looking all the way back and saying, okay, what was my data source? Right.
And that's going to be like security trails, Shodan, exactly. CIDR ranges.
Yeah, even, and I've got Bbot and M.O.A.B.s running on their separate servers, right? They're doing their own thing. I'm not doing the brute forcing right now because I just got so much. Whenever I do run, I got so many targets coming in until it works. I just don't have. I'm choking.
Yeah.
So then, I trace back through and all the way back. Okay, it came from security trails. Okay, whenever it was, what time of day did I find it? Did I find it in the morning? Did I find it midday? Did I find it in the afternoon? Did it resolve the first time? Did it, like, sometimes I find that I get a file and it's not till the second day before it resolves and gets to my system. I'm like, okay, what happened there? Was that an operational issue? Was it down? Right. So I'm trying to time crunch down and find the areas that, okay, where are the gaps? Because I don't want to be second.
Do
But yeah,
do you have like a specific timeline that you want to see there? Like, I want to see, okay, it made it through my whole pipeline in one day, and I found the vuln, and that's the happy path. Is that? I mean, what kind of metrics do you have for that?
So basically, my goal is within 18 hours of discovery that it's in my output.
That's
right?
Great, man. That's awesome.
And I see it, and
that
varies.
Top of your head.
And that varies because that's on a Monday. A Saturday and Sunday is going to be completely different because your number of targets is going to be different. And holiday weeks, they're different. So all those things taken, like, you can see. Now I look for those things because when we were doing advertising, I mean, we had to know that viewing habits are going to be different on the weekends or on a holiday, right? But same thing with work productivity and releasing new assets. It's the same thing. Your dev teams they're going to adjust schedules based upon the upcoming holidays. So
Absolutely.
The upcoming weekly into a holiday, it's going to be lightweight, and not to weekends. Same thing. You're going to see less stuff come up. So
yeah. That makes sense. So just to summarize that, because all of these processes get pretty intense. You found your vulnerability. It's new. You're going back. You're looking at how long it takes to go through your pipeline to get to the point where it's like, hey, John, this is something you should look at. That sort of thing. You're trying to figure out what's happening there. And then do you have data on, like, hey, 90% of my vulnerabilities are coming from CIDR scans on this target? Like, maybe that's something I should spend more time looking into. Have you done that sort of thing before? Is that something you do on a regular basis?
One-off. I mean, I do a one-off. I mean, it's not like I got 100 bugs that I'm like all of a sudden looking through and find it. But yeah, I do see. Right. Like, I mean, I like the indicators of, like, okay, what's my hit rate for a CIDR? How many end targets? How many IPs do I scan? Is it really? Can I prioritize accordingly?
So I guess in order to do that, you'd have to log all of that as well and say, okay, is there some thing you have that says, okay, I found a vulnerability on this endpoint and it's associated with this asset and it's associated with this path and this data source and this sort of thing. So do you have like a database or a file that's full of that information?
No, I should. You think I would? I don't have that. I mean, because usually I do it a one-off. When you talk about a manual thing, that's what I'm going to manually go through, right? I know the indicators, gotcha. Right? I'm more to be completely managing end to end, yes, you would have that. But I don't think I think that even goes to that's one level.
Wow,
You
dude,
identify a level before low. You found
I found the bottom. I found the
yeah,
endless,
exactly.
the
The
bottom
bottom of
of
the
the
rabbit
data
hole.
science seek. That's very cool, man. There's so many possibilities you can do with all that data too. So then taking it that extra level and correlating, like, okay, here's the vulnerability. What's the recipe for this vulnerability? Well, it's an API grouped, subdomain on a Shodan source domain with a path that has a word from the URL or from the domain name or something like that.
Right.
Even something like that would be able to just be like, oh man, that'd be mind-boggling to see all of the data you could pull out of there. I love that. So I think you covered it a little bit. We talked about it briefly in the past, but I think this is a good transition into the digital marketing arena, because I've got some questions about that as well.
Okay.
How do you apply conversion funnels, the conversion funnel that you mentioned before, to this bug bounty thing? Is that the thing you just described before, or is that something different?
No, it is. It's kind of so in digital marketing and direct response marketing, in a lot of operations, there is a measurement that's called a conversion funnel. Basically, you have X number coming in, and you're whittling down to a certain endpoint. So in bug bounty, right, you start with your total targets in, and you're going to do some filtering along the way, and you're going to do some processing, and then at the end, you hope that what comes out at the end is going to be what you're highly focused on or what you want to gain, right? So in conversion funnels, we used to think about how many impressions do we get? How many clicks did it lead to? How many form fills did it lead out to? How many customers did it lead to we monetize? And then you go through and you plug all those conversion funnels all over the place and be able to say, okay, this is working, this is not, right? Same thing here. So in bug bounties, like all my assets in, right? And then we go through, did it resolve? Did it, did they, eventually did I get to a bug, right? And you're looking at all the different sources. So, okay, this particular source is always the one that if I'm finding something, it's always security trails. Okay, well, that tells me something, right? That security trail funnel is important. Or, if it's a CIDR scan, okay, which cloud is it coming from? Which, is there a certain, region that's more valuable than others? Things of that nature. So you got conversion funnels all over the place, and you're filtering it down.
Wow,
does that make sense?
That's awesome, man. So yeah, that's a technique that's borrowed from marketing, from the digital marketing world, and then we're applying this to assets in the scenario rather than users in a conversion funnel, in a traditional sales conversion funnel, and say, okay, where along this funnel, all right, the user comes in, they can land on the website. Did they fill out the form? No. Okay, so there's some sort of fall off between the user landing on the site and then filling out the form. And then, in our scenario, there's an asset.
What marketing recipe can I use on that group? Right? Well, do I need to change the color to the button to be red or purple or green? Right? Like that's where marketing goes into.
Marketing, right? Man.
Yeah.
It's great. And then in this scenario, go ahead.
Oh, marketing is another name for hacking. I mean, instead of hacking, I mean, hacking relates to computers, marketing relates to people, right? You're hacking people.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, go watch Social Dilemma, and then put your mindset on of like, okay, hacking people, you get people to change their mind without them knowing. Have you seen that movie yet?
That I have not seen it yet. That seems fascinating. So I'm definitely gonna I'm gonna have to check that out after this.
Yeah. No.
All right. Let me get to. We have so many things in this document here that I need to pick your brain on. So I guess we'll switch over now towards the digital marketing area. And we've sort of talked about talked about the concept of conversion funnels, with people coming in versus assets coming in and that sort of thing. I'm wondering if there's any tips that you have as clearly an industry expert on digital marketing and that sort of thing. What kind of things do people need to know when they're looking at a digital marketing platform from an attacker's perspective? Because there's a lot of lingo, marketing concepts, that sort of thing. What data is important, what data is not important, that people need to understand for them to be able to have that sort of subject matter expert approach to attacking a marketing platform. So can you give us like, I know it's a lot because I know I'm asking you to just like condense your whole, work history and expertise in digital marketing into a thing. But what kind of things do we need to know where we're going to get the most value out of it?
So the things you need to know is like with hacking any target, right? You need to know the industry's ins and outs, the operations. You need to know the terminology. You need to know what's important to the users, what's important to the business, right? You need to understand the ecosystem of how that works. Now, whenever you get into there, right, then you can start looking for things that are of high value that might be disguised. I guess before I get to that point, I would like to say is that with every ad platform, there is tons and tons and tons of documentation. There's a lot of functionality from the point of ad, content creation to delivery to bidding to the result sets. And there's a lot that goes on into that. So knowing all that, there's areas to functionality to take a look at. Now, by being somebody that has a knowledge of, hey, I was once a digital advertiser, I know what's important to me, right? And I kind of a subject matter expert, systems design, know how things should work, type thing. You combine those two, you take a step up and you start taking a look at these platforms, right? And you can kind of see some areas that data shouldn't be at.
Yeah,
highly sensitive.
That makes sense. So I guess without, we walk the line here on critical thinking quite often of like, give us your secret sauce and tell us about all of these critical vulnerabilities you found on all of these companies that we don't. Sometimes we don't explicitly name, sometimes we do explicitly name, but a lot of times people know what we're talking about. So I guess with that line in mind there, what kind of data in those sort of environments should people be looking to leak, or what kind of data is important in those sort of applications?
Yes. So
all the ads are getting published anyway, right? That's one thing that I've struggled with. Obviously, you've got personal information of like the people, that have accounts on the platforms, but like it's a highly public sort of concept, and somehow you've been able to extract a ton of money from these platforms. So what data are you getting?
So as a consumer, it's a very public thing, right? You're just being served ads. But so as an advertiser, right, you're in direct competition with every other advertiser, right? That real estate space comes at a price, and you're trying to get the best real estate space for the lowest price, right? And it's typically done through blind auction. There's some public auctions out there now. The blind
What is a blind auction?
Auction, sorry, that's my southern accent. Auction, AUC.
Yeah, but what is a blind auction versus a not blind auction?
So blind auction is whenever you're bidding on keywords, right? You're saying, I'm willing to spend $4.37 on this keyword. It's a whatever phrase match, blah, 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 for this demographic and yada, 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 right? Now, that's my bid. Now, if I'm $1 over advertiser B, I'm paying way too much, right? There's a lot of efficiency, or the inefficiency is very profitable for these companies.
Interesting.
Right? And because you're in competition, you're going to be like, okay, if I'm Toyota, I'm like, what's Ford doing? Like, what's their strategy? How much are they spending?
How much are they paying in the blind option? Yeah.
What are they doing?
Option.
Right?
Okay. I'm saying option. Auction. Yeah. That makes sense.
All right. So there's a lot of data that goes around that is highly sensitive whenever it's viewed from the standpoint of a customer or an advertiser's KPI.
Interesting. So in those scenarios, you're kind of wanting to pull data on how much people are paying for advertising and how much money they're putting into specific keywords or specific phrases or specific ads within that environment. And maybe the ad content, I guess the ad content is important because you have to be able to know the keyword, but the ad content is going to get shown to the user anyway. What you're mostly looking to do is figure out how efficiently their ads are working and what their spend is on those specific things. So you can butt right up to that a little bit, right?
Now, I would say this caveat right now. If you were to go to Yahoo now and look in there, you will find costs per, bid, or, and that's because that's the section that's sort of leaking that information right now is a public auction. It's so I'm save everybody the pain and agony of going, oh, I found right now. So be careful on that. Okay, but there were times whenever it's a private blind auction, and you're able to strip and maybe find you find some KPI data that shouldn't be in there, and whenever it is an issue that is I guess persistent in the overall design of all your ad display operations, you then have a bug that gets rolled out everywhere.
I see. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And I imagine also, maybe tell me if I'm on base or off base with this. I've done a little bit of digital marketing myself. That being able to tell the contents of an ad before that ad runs, would that be something that has high impact to a marketer to say, like, okay, Ford is running an ad that says, Toyota's break down more than Ford's or something like I don't know, something like that. Having that information in advance, would that be valuable to Toyota, or is that mostly just this is going to be public information anyway? It doesn't really quite matter.
You know what? I mean, I think you can make the case, because let's say I'm going to put a blitz campaign on for the holidays, right? I don't want my competition to know what my marketing message is. This is part of my strategy, right? I don't know. They shouldn't know anything that I'm doing, and any hint that destroys the efficiency of my. So yeah, I'd be mad as hell if that was the leak as an advertiser.
Yeah.
So
interesting.
Yeah, I think if you,
I've got some ad platforms that I put in the doc that I'm not going to mention explicitly, but that I've got some stuff on that I need to go back and revisit, I think, after this conversation, and maybe I'll hook you in.
there is, when you're talking about advertising, it's a cutthroat type of situation. I mean, there's a lot of like spy foo I remember using. I mean, you're trying to do anything and everything to find out what your competitors' keywords are, what they're doing, what ads, what their performance was. We used all kind of data aggregators to be able to. They were basically crawling and screenshotting and doing all that kind of stuff and providing reports. So it's a competitive world. And so if you can find some information like that, and then I would definitely spin it up as like, your bread and butter, your industry, you make money from ad sales, right? And your core moneymaker is the thing that is at risk. No, hi, definitely.
That's bad. Yeah. Dude, I'd love to see you. I need to just invite you in to negotiate for me. Your bread and butter is on the line here. No, hi.
Right.
That.
No.
That's hi. End of story. That's great, man. So one of the things that's a part of your sort of hacker signature that I remember you from in the live hacking events is this whole concept of a M.O.A.B., a mother of all bugs,
right?
That I've heard you talk about, and there's a lot of chatter going around in the live hacking event scene when you were crushing it about, Jon having some sort of secret, weapon of a bug, golden goose, M.O.A.B., whatever you want to call it. I'm wondering, obviously in one or two live hacking events, you've had something like that that's just blown up and just you've found a ton of vulnerabilities with it. I'm wondering how often you find stuff like this where it's like very systemic. You had some criteria here that you mentioned in the interview. You said no one else knows to look for it. It can be found on different host functionality endpoint, making it C-SPI resistant, and it's a rating of higher critical impact.
Right.
That's what you've kind of defined. And can you talk to us a little bit about your experiences with those and how often you're finding them, what you're doing to find them? Yeah.
So the one that we were alluding to earlier about finding, particularly finding it that you find information or data that you can extract information from in a place that it shouldn't be, and it's everywhere. That is a M.O.A.B., right? That was a
Mm.
key fundamental design issue that was persistent and it was everywhere, right? It was across, think about every single place that an advertisement was displayed. That's a big bug. All right, so the other ones, there's nothing that's been like a M.O.A.B. like that before. It was just one issue and it was persistent everywhere. I've been able to get into like a system and then be able to do a string of 30 bugs. That's another.
Sure.
That not quite a M.O.A.B. I had a mini M.O.A.B. With
it doesn't quite meet the measurement for a M.O.A.B.,
didn't,
but it's a
it
mini
didn't,
M.O.A.B.
So in that 702, that one, that's my first live hacking event. I stumbled upon the YQL servers. Everybody knew what they were at the time. You could interact with them, some queries for the most part, but you didn't know exactly the basics. Well, there was probably, I don't know, 30 servers. I'm just making that up. I don't know what the exact number is.
Sure.
Let's say there was 30 of those servers, right? And I found one of the servers that had an API document. It was the only one that had an API document. And that API document gave me an endpoint that then could apply to all 30 of those or 30 hosts.
Oh, man.
Yeah. And that API document led to 2 mediums for each host. And then because of the endpoints that it would then, continue to provide once you fully out the complete path, there was other opportunities like SSF all over the place. So then there was another couple bugs here and there. So the end of the day, right? You had one API document on one host that gave you enough information to pull 75, 80 bugs. I can't remember how many it was, but it was from one endpoint,
dude.
Right? It rolled out. So it was something that applied to everything. Right time, right place.
Wow, freaking Yahoo, man! Like they rock for paying that sort of thing, and also for having those sort of phones. I guess in those sort of scenarios, I'm wondering, do you automate the report? Because it's like that's like 75 reports you got to write. That's gonna take days just to write the report.
It was simplified copy paste. I mean, it was simple. I mean, that was it was copy paste. And then I could refer to report, blah, blah, blah. So it was simple, right?
Right, sure.
But as far as, like automation, like that was before Nuclei, right? And it was before Fluff. And so I had Nmap and I'd create an NSC file. And then it would do my vulnerability
study.
Yeah.
John, are you kidding me?
Yeah. So that was my nuclei scanner. Yeah. And I dumped it out and so
dude, that's like a really old way of doing it there.
Yeah, but I mean, I didn't know any better. Maybe there were tools available. I really didn't. But yeah, it was like somehow I jumped onto the NSC map, but that was 2016, right? There's a lot more efficient ways to do it today.
That's nuts, man. I love how we all just got trounced by custom M.O.A.B.s script in that scenario. That makes me feel great. Thank you for that, John.
But no. Honestly, it was really you found and so yeah, you can. So yeah, the results of that. The results of that life hacking event definitely overqualified me because you see the one endpoint that led to that. Then there was this other little marketing, or not marketing, but there's a weird metrics panel I've never seen before. It was at one
analytics or metrics panel, yeah.
Yeah, it was weird, and I've never seen it before or after. And it was for a hot minute everywhere. So that's another 15, 20 bugs. And then, layer in a couple of virtual hosts and you're done. And bang, I look like a rock star.
Yeah, you can say that again, dude. That was crazy. So I guess in that scenario, YQL server finding an API endpoint on one of them or
One.
API documentation on one of them that just applied to all of them and just sort of mass apply the principle, kind of like what you've talked about. And then also being able to identify this metrics panel that you can spray across all of them. I think it's clear, your methodology is very, I guess, distribution oriented as well. Hey, I'm going to take this thing. What can I apply? What else can I apply this to? And do you have any specific tips for how to avoid dupes in this scenario? Because I feel like Yahoo's a great program for this. They pay them out each one, but some programs would say, okay, whatever metrics panel, we're gonna say this is like a systemic problem. Dupe it all back to one. Have you had those, and how does that? How do you avoid those scenarios normally?
I can't avoid them. Yeah. So each program has its own personality. That's what you have to understand, right? And the personality is defined by the management team of that bug bounty program. Some are going to be, hey, that's a unique change, and we'll reward you accordingly. So you can have some that are much more favorable for the researchers than others, and others are very protective of the business. They're like, no, it's the same issue. It's just applied differently.
Yeah,
I've had those situations on the end. It's a gut punch. It's an absolute gut punch. You've got to be thick-skinned about it. But yeah, I don't have any way to, unless you can kind of prove specifically that it's a unique fix on each. I can go into some details on a particular experience that I had. It was really rough, and it's been 4 years, and I still have a little burn on it. And I'm a thick-skinned guy, right? It doesn't get it, but that one,
yeah.
And it was the same thing, right? It was like, nope, it's just this one fix. I'm like, you think so? But I can't argue against you.
You've mentioned, a burnout that occurred, and you've mentioned sort of the ups and downs of bug bounty, like you're just talking about right now. I guess as a more seasoned hunter that's been doing this for years, what do you think? What are some things you do to protect yourself nowadays from, one, burnout, and two, disappointment? Because my wife always says to me, I always run, whenever I find this is what I do, John. Whenever I find a vulnerability, I'm like, I found something. And then I get up and I run in the other room and I say, hey, Mariah, I found this $15,000 vuln that does XYZ. And she's like, did they pay it? And I'm like, no. And she's like, it's not a $15,000 vuln, is it? You gotta temper your expectations, Justin. You gotta not count your eggs before they hatch, because she's seen me go from way up here to go down when it's like a dupe of a 35K bug like I had earlier this last year. So do you have any advice on that, or do you just ride the wave?
It's hard not to run into the other room and do a little Victor dance.
Yeah.
I mean, that's that.
Yeah.
I mean, that
exactly.
You're just bug hunting. There's a dopamine hit, right? I mean, and it doesn't necessarily. I mean, sometimes it's some money. Sometimes it's just, oh my God, I just did this. I never thought that. But there's a dopamine hit from that, right? Yeah. That's like with any drug. And that's the problem that I got into, right? I was chasing the high. And that's a wrong way to go. And it definitely earns to burn out. But yeah, it's so hard. I guess there was a saying that we always said, it's like, oh, that's just business, right? Don't take it personally. It's just business. And that's what I go back to. Eases the pain a little bit, but it's still rough. It's still frustrating that second place is first loser.
It's true, especially in dupe scenarios and stuff like that, where it's like,
do you do dupe analysis? I mean, do you go? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you, but do you do dupe analysis?
No.
No.
Yeah, I do. It hurts a little bit, to go back and say like, and it kind of distracts me a little bit from the pain of the dupes too. You're like, all right, why did this get dupes? Like why am I getting duped on this? And so you go back and you look, and sometimes you can draw a correlation when you've got monitoring stuff in place, and you can say, okay, I didn't react to this alert fast enough, especially when it's the stuff that's real tight. I duped by like a couple hours or something, but most of the time for me, it's like, okay, I spent some time looking at this specific thing and somebody, beat me to it by a little bit. That's just how it is. That's how the cards lie. But then when there's scenarios where it's like, this bug has been open for 6 months and it's still not resolved, that's a real hard sell for me to go back to that program. Like,
right.
Like I tell them that in the report too. I'm like, hey guys, I noticed that the report ID that I'm duped to on this one is over 6 months old. It's a crit. Why is this happening? And I'll specifically request an explanation or some sort of response for that, because I feel like that's a little bit of a violation of hacker trust in that scenario, because it's like we are putting in our time for a results-based thing, right? And we provided you a result. We provided you with a vulnerability, and if you can't protect our time with that by getting these resolved at a decent pace, then our ROI for this this program goes down substantially. So that's kind of where I'm at with dupe analysis. I don't know.
Yeah, no. I to your point, like I always try to if I have some type of question, sometimes I know a dupe. Like I'm putting in the report, I'm like this 100% is a dupe. But sometimes if I don't understand, or even if I know it's going to be a dupe, I like, how far am I behind? I'll ask for the report ID. I'm like, 12 hours. I'm like, let's see what happens here. But yeah.
Yeah.
I was trying to
I imagine definitely please ask more questions. I love it when guests do that. Especially in the scenarios when you're in an automation flow. I remember we talked about it on the episode with Sean Yo from Asset Note. There was a time where him and I were just going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth with these takeovers, and I was like, dang it, Sean's beating me. Yes, I'm beating Sean. Yeah, dang it, Sean's beating. It's just back and forth, and it's a lot of fun, man. It's entertaining, but man, does it sting when you say, man, Sean made $10,000 today from something that I could have done if I had just written my code a little bit better,
Right. Exactly.
So, yeah, it's a lot, man. I'm looking at this document. We still have so much that we could cover on here, and we've had so much good content so far already. Unfortunately, we've got to bring it to a close because I do have a stop. But Jon, thank you so much for coming on, man. Is there anything else you wanna shout out or you want to discuss in the last couple minutes here?
No, I just want to say thank you so much for having me on, and for the content creators in this space. Hats off to you. Oh my gosh, I know it's a burden of love, but it's so greatly appreciated, and what you guys do is fantastic. So keep up the good work, and be tuning in.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Jon. Yeah, I really do appreciate that. It is a lot of it's a lot of work, but you get a lot of love out of it too from people like you, and also you coming on the show and stuff like that. It eases the load, because all I've got to do is sit here and be in dump my brain of like, all right, how does he do it, and then get the answers. So it's a great experience for me as well. Yeah. Alrighty, I think with that we'll close. Once again, Jon, Mr. Mayonaise, Mr. Mayonnaise, thanks for coming on, and we'll see you on the HackerOne leaderboards.
Sounds great. Thank you very much.
Peace.
Bye.